the newsagents.
Many of you know, before I was elected as vice president, before I was elected as United States Senator, I was the elected Attorney General, as I've mentioned, of California. And before that, I was a courtroom prosecutor. In those roles, I took on perpetrators of all kinds. Predators who abused women. Fraudsters who ripped off consumers. Cheaters who broke the rules for their own gain. So hear me when I say, I know Donald Trump's type.
It was a brilliant line, but this prosecutor also knows how to prosecute a campaign to win the Democratic Party nomination, because it has happened at lightning speed. Within 30 hours of Joe Biden announcing that he is pulling out, far from it being a circular firing squad, Kamala Harris has taken the crown and done it with some style and gusto.
But make no mistake, this campaign is about to get dirty, really dirty. They're already calling her names. We'll leave some of that to your imagination, but we'll take you through some of the extraordinary clips that are surfacing of what they think of Kamala Harris. Welcome to the Newsagents.
It's John.
It's Emily.
And hurricane season hasn't yet arrived in America, but a hurricane has blown through Wilmington, Delaware, all the way to Washington, and taking in all 50 states at the same time. Because in less than 2 days, Kamala Harris has sewn up the Democratic nomination for president. People were predicting a bloodbath. I kind of thought that it would get messy and ugly, instead of which the working the phones, the putting pressure on, the twisting arms, the charming of people has worked, and everyone has fallen into line. There is $100 million that has flowed in that 32 hours, 36 hours, and it has been phenomenal to watch. And I think it's caused a little unease in Mar-a-Lago.
So what's the top line of today? It's basically that Kamala has done it, probably done it. There isn't anyone who's come forward to offer themselves as a candidate. She has passed the threshold. She needed 300 from, no more than 50 from one state. She has cleared that. And more importantly, everyone else that might have thrown their hat into the ring has thrown their endorsement behind Kamala, thereby signalling that they are not going to stand. So she has now become, for better or for worse, the anointed one, the appointed candidate for president. And when we talk about Delaware, really interesting that is Joe Biden's hometown, Joe Biden's campaign headquarters with her. And now, of course, it's become hers. It is the Harris headquarters. Overnight, she has found 30,000 new volunteers to help her. She raised $81 million in just the first 24 hours. And she has created, I think, importantly, this explosion of energy and money. You talked about the hurricane. That's what it looks like, an explosion of energy and money. People who had never donated before, people who have come to her when they had not been interested in the Democratic candidate formally. And if you think back to the kind of way Donald Trump has been playing this race, and more of which later, just a week ago, he was putting out merchandise at the Republican National Convention which said, Biden equals weak, Trump equals strong. That's just not looking so clever now, because everything has changed and it's left him looking on the back foot.
The other thing I think is really interesting, and you talked about the new donors. So kind of 2/3 of the people who've given money had not given money before. So it's not just a question that the big money donors had turned off the taps when they saw Biden decline after that debate at the end of June. It's that new people have been energised and brought in. US elections, by and large, are won at the margins in those key swing states. And I think what Kamala Harris is doing, because of her popularity with black and brown voters, the minorities, that actually the Democrats can look at the map of America in a slightly different way than perhaps they were doing when it was just Joe Biden. The Joe Biden strategy was Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania. Those were the key swing states for him that he thought that would be his path to 270, the number of electoral college votes you need to get to win. But I think with Kamala Harris now, Arizona suddenly starts to look like it might be in play. Georgia looks like it might be in play. Georgia, which, you know, the Democrats won by a whisker in
11,000 votes,
11,780 votes, to be precise. You know, these are the fine margins we're talking about. Just think of that. A majority of 11,000 votes is fine in a parliamentary constituency. As it happened in July last year, that wasn't even safe. This is over a whole state in which millions of people live, not just 100,000 people live. So the margins are wafer thin. If Kamala Harris is energizing new people into politics, because she is the candidate now, because she's seen as younger, more dynamic, this is not to play down the enormous challenges that the Democrats still have, but it is significant.
And last night, Kamala Harris was very quick to bring Joe Biden into the conversation. Now, we haven't seen the president since that statement came out. We haven't seen him since we were told he had COVID. We have no idea, to be frank, how he looks, how ill he is, or how he's feeling. But he was sort of posted into a phone call for her rally. And she is then paying tribute to him with such warmth and such genuine sort of excitement. We'll play you a little clip of that here.
We love Joe and Jill. We really do. They truly are like family to us. And we do. Everybody here does.
It's neutral.
I knew you were still there. You're not going anywhere, Joe.
I'm watching you, kid. I'm watching you, kid. I love you.
I love you, Joe.
And I think what's interesting is if you compare it to the kind of statements that came out on Sunday night from both Trump and Vance, they were so ungenerous at Biden's resignation. Now, I can hear you saying, well, they would be, wouldn't they? But actually, this is a moment of American history. You've seen what happened here when Rishi Sunak resigned, and Starmer could not have been more gracious. Jeremy Hunt could not have been more gracious about leaving Downing Street. The transfer of power was something that, as we've talked about before, we can genuinely be proud of as a country. This was a moment where Biden said, OK, I hear the party. I hear what you're saying. I'm stepping down. There could have been a beat then. There could have been a beat of graciousness from both Trump and Vance to recognise what he had done as a senator, as a vice president, as a president. You know, he's been in politics for 50 years. Even if you wanted to say we don't always agree, we have different policies, but I appreciate what you've done for the state of the country. None of that. They just immediately said he should never have been president. And I think that sets up something of the quality of the debate and the race that we're now going to hear.
So from Donald Trump, I think there is unease. And just let me read you one thing from that he posted on Truth Social. The Democrats lied and misled the public about crooked Joe Biden, and now we find he's a complete and total cognitive and physical mess. They also misled the Republican Party, causing it to waste a great deal of time and money to be resumed. So he obviously thinks that we've been duped. We have been... And of course, I just sense that there is a little tiny bit of concern.
Yeah.
That there's suddenly all their calculations and the calculation of J.D. Vance being the perfect VP running mate. You double down. You don't need to broaden the ticket. You don't need to broaden the appeal. It's just double down. We are MAGA.
We are male MAGA.
We are male white MAGA. I wonder whether that is looking quite so smart today. Look, as I say, I think there are enormous, huge challenges. But Maitlis, you and I, when we spoke this morning, we kind of had this conversation, which is, look, did Biden get out of the race too late? Yeah, damn right he did. Much better if he'd done it in February. But now you're looking at it and think, is this a piece of genius? Is it a masterstroke?
Feels fresh.
That suddenly, so close to the election, you have got a new figure coming into the race that is going to energise, that is going to give people a sense that there is a new direction. I mean, look, I still think that it is Donald Trump's election to lose still, but Donald Trump is clearly spooked by what has happened.
Well, I said at the very beginning that this race is going to get nasty, and perhaps it won't surprise you to hear that already we've heard from Republicans, a Republican congressman, a lawmaker, calling Harris a DEI hire. In other words, she's about diversity, equality, inclusion. She's only there because she's a black woman.
Only there to make up the numbers.
Yeah.
She's not really there
To
on
which
talent.
the answer is probably, Vance is only there because he's a white man with some severely weird views. This is a clip of him from a couple of years back when he was running for Senate. And this is how he is describing Kamala Harris at the time.
We're effectively run in this country via the Democrats, via our corporate oligarchs, by a bunch of childless cat ladies who are miserable at their own lives and the choices that they've made. And so they want to make the rest of the country miserable, too. And it's just a basic fact. You look at Kamala Harris, Pete Buttigieg, AOC, the entire future of the Democrats is controlled by people without children. And how does it make any sense that we've turned our country over to people who don't really have a direct stake in it?
Fantastic.
It's
a childless
unbelievable.
Catwoman with no job. I mean, apart from the fact he's actually wrong, Pete Buttigieg does have kids. We talked yesterday about him.
Yeah, but he
raising
doesn't
emissions.
really have kids, does he? If you're of that viewpoint, Emily,
Right.
he doesn't really. They're not real
So
children.
that's what we're dealing with. And when Andrea Leadsom made very similar comments about Theresa May when she was running for Prime Minister, she actually had to pull out the race almost 24 hours later.
And
apologised because it was seen as so vacuous and so incredibly lacking in sort of humanity, quite frankly.
Well, I'm going to set up a policy that says that you cannot be a doctor if you're childless, because obviously you've got no interest in the future of society and the health of the nation. Yeah. I don't think you can be a teacher if you're childless, because obviously you've got no interest in future generations and how well educated they are. So I think we should ban all teachers. I mean, it is the most preposterous and ugly
I think you've got a
comment.
forced procreation policy, haven't you? Just everyone should be forced to have children.
Well,
all the time.
And also the other thing that's so ridiculous, if you have to have given birth to have an interest in the future of the nation, how is it there have only been male presidents until now? It just doesn't quite add up, does it?
Okay, my favourite moment on Twitter today has been, to your question of whether Donald Trump is now having slight concerns about JD Vance, somebody has put, "Sorry, Donald, you must now carry him to term." Which just pulls in everything that is Donald Trump's plate.
Abortion,
Vance and abortion
and all the rest of it.
And rights.
Yeah, but I think what we are seeing now is a paradigm shift in the race. We don't know what the fallout will be. We don't know who her running mate is going to be. But my God, politics in US, which is always astonishing, has become really interesting and unknowable. And you can be sure that at Democrat HQ, Republican HQ, they are polling like mad to find out what the impact of this is.
Yeah, some of it is not as explicitly spelled out. I mean, JD Vance said just today, it's the last chance to save this country. You can hear lots of different things into that. You can hear that they don't want a Democrat-run House or a Democrat-run Senate or a Democrat-led presidency. Or you can also start to hear a dog whistle, which is talking about they're coming for you. You know, us poor white men are on a losing wicket here.
Not a losing wicket. It's curveballs, isn't it? It's curveballs from the mound onto the plate.
I don't think anyone who doesn't understand the laws of cricket should be allowed to run for president.
Yeah, exactly. So children, you've got to have children and you've got to be able to know the LBW rule.
When have you not known me to mix my sporting metaphors?
We'll be back after the break with Dame Melanie Dawes, the head of Ofcom, the broadcasting regulator. So we've just been discussing America, and of course the broadcasting space in the US plays such an important role, where you've got Fox on the right, and then you've got Newsmax even further to the right, and then you've got One American News Network, you know, jockeying for who can be the most right wing of the cable channels, and you've got sort of MSNBC slightly to the left and CNN as well in that space as well. And you kind of look at Britain and you think, well, it's a heavily regulated broadcasting space, totally different from the US. Except that, of course, over the past 2 years or 3 years, however long they've been going, GB News has sort of slightly shaken the kaleidoscope of what is acceptable and what is tolerable when it comes to British news.
Yeah, and so today, on the day, in fact, that the BBC's published its own annual accounts and also showed how many fewer people paid for the licence fee last year than in previous years, we thought it'd be a good idea to talk to Melanie Dawes. Now, she's the head of Ofcom, the broadcast regulator, about the changing landscape in the UK media, what it means to have much more unregulated social media, what it means for online commentary, and what it means for GB News, this sort of new insurgent channel, which has now faced multiple investigations and been criticised for its broadcasting content 12 different times without any sanction. So we want to talk to her a little bit about that as well.
So, Dame Melanie Dawes, thank you very much indeed for coming into the studio today. On the day that the BBC announces that 500,000 people have stopped paying the licence fee, that's £75 million, and GB News is the fastest growing TV channel in the UK, what does that tell us about the way news is developing, about the way viewing habits are changing?
Well, look, I think what we have in the UK is an incredibly vibrant media landscape. I mean, I've been told you've just had 100 million downloads of your podcast. We're seeing, new formats, new programmes, some of them on TV and radio, some of them not, that are coming, into our, system, and viewers and listeners, I think, are benefiting from all of that. Ofcom's job is to safeguard the standards for regulated TV and radio, as you know, but I think we have a lot to be proud of, honestly. And when you look at trust, particularly in our big players, our big national players like the BBC and ITV, the public have high trust in those services. And I think that's quite an important thing in this world of social media where the debate can often get quite frenetic.
Of course. And I said at the outset that, GB News fastest growing, but from a low base. Is GB News playing by the same rules as ITV and BBC?
Well, look, there's one set of Ofcom rules. Let's just be really clear about that. But they are offering, I think, a slightly different service. They're not the only ones, by the way, to do things like have politicians presenting shows. You've got them on LBC. After all, I think you've got Sopel kicking off a show today, haven't you?
Was it yesterday? And a mixture of different parties.
Exactly. So the innovation is there across the industry, but Ofcom's job is to maintain that set of standards, particularly around due impartiality and due accuracy when we're talking about news and current affairs. We're doing that, with constant innovation and change, but trying to uphold that sense that we want to see a diverse range of programming out there. We want to see freedom of expression and creativity, but we want to see a proper due weight of views being brought to bear on any important topic.
Sure, and you said the variety of views and,
and opinions, by the way.
Yeah, and
nothing wrong with that.
Rightly say, Sopel is on LBC as we're recording this, and yesterday it was Labour's Emily Thornberry who was doing the show. But if you look at GB News, I think that what they have paid out to contributors from the Tory party is something like, it's in the hundreds of thousands, and to Labour contributors, it's £1,000. They're not doing. It's not like they're giving the same amount of airtime to Labour MPs as they are to Conservative MPs.
Well, look, what the Ofcom rules say is that it's about the content of the programme. It isn't about, apart from this question of whether politicians can present the news, which they can't, but it isn't about having the same number of politicians from equal sides. It's about making sure that there is a range of opinions. So we have said you can have a politician, presenting a show, and talking about matters of really important public interest.
And are they a news presenter then?
Well, so look, you're getting into definitions of news and current affairs here, and we've recently, to be honest, what we did was we went out and thought, let's get out of the London media bubble, if you like, and talk to the public about what they think about these questions. Really interesting research that we published a couple of months ago, and what the rules say is that if you're a politician, you can't present the news, but you may present current affairs shows as long as you have due weight of different opinions being brought to bear. And what the public said was, it wasn't always clear what the distinction was between the news, like, sometimes it's really obvious, like the BBC News at 10 when you're reading the news bulletin. It isn't always, obvious, and they want to make sure that broadcasters signal that properly to them. But when we asked, what do you think about politicians presenting current affairs shows? Quite a lot of people are like, I'm not that comfortable about it. But what they didn't want was to ban it. And I think there's something here about what we are as a country, actually. There's something about, people are prepared to accept that they may not like everything, but actually to go so far as to regulate everything is not necessarily what we want.
But you are the regulator.
We are.
And You have found GB News in breach of the rules 12 times.
We have.
Since it launched in 2021. Remind us, have they been sanctioned for any of those breaches?
So what we always do is we give everybody a chance, and people can make mistakes, and we don't always move straight into fines just for the first offence. What we have said now, though, is for the latest breach, we are now considering a move to sanctions.
The first one was 7th of November 2022. You said it was a mistake. It has been resolved. It wasn't sanctioned. Then we had March 2023. It was misleading interpretation of official data about COVID. There was no sanction. The same person, Mark Steen, 9th of May 2023. Ofcom requested that GB News attend a meeting to discuss its approach to compliance. I don't hear a sanction then, even though it was about a serious conspiracy theory without challenge or context. September 2023, it was about the Esther and Phil episode. Do you remember, with the interview with Jeremy Hunt? No sanction. I can go on. My point is that there has been no sanction.
Well, no, the point is that we don't sanction, for
12 times
straight. Well, we are now moving to considering sanctions, and just to be really clear, though, whether it's GB News or any other broadcasters, being found in breach by Ofcom of the Broadcasting Code is very serious, and it is taken extremely
seriously. It might not be serious to them. That's my point, Melanie. It might be serious to you and Ofcom, but if they don't care,
I think it is serious to people we license.
They keep doing it.
Well, actually, the record in the last few months has been significantly improved, and we want that to be sustained. So I'm not here about, constantly looking to find problems from GB News or anywhere else. What we want to do is to see broadcasters able to innovate, able to have creative freedom of expression, which is an incredibly important part of our democracy, but also following the rules. And that's what we're looking towards in the future. But, look, the track record, I think, of Ofcom here has been very determined. 19 investigations, 12 breaches, and we are now moving to sanctions.
No sanction.
We are now moving to considering sanctions.
After 19 investigations?
Well, look, I think sometimes people want to see regulators kind of, having these tough conversations in public, or kind of summary justice, and kind of that's just not how we do things. We have very fair procedures, very consistent procedures. We apply them to everybody. They give people a chance to make mistakes in different parts of the Broadcasting Code. But when we do see concerns that are repeated, we will move towards fines. And that is what we're now doing.
Unless they're just not listening to you.
So what sort of fine would GB News get?
I'm not going to get into the details of any fine, honestly, because these are still ongoing legal processes. But, we apply the same rules in the same way fairly to everybody. And if I may say so, look, I think obviously we've had a lot of work to do with GB News and some other newer broadcasters, but I think the big questions are actually about our wider news ecosystem and the impact of social media on that. And we know that actually if you're watching a regulated news service, you're much more likely to feel that you can trust it. People don't trust the news and information they get on social media. We've researched this in depth. You're much more likely to go down a rabbit hole, get stuck, not be able to spot.
We will come on to that, I promise you.
And I think those
just
are the
to finish
big
this conversation.
Just, I was really interested in what happened with one of the presenters on GB News, who talked about that COVID vaccines had turbocharged the number of cancers in young people. The presenter was Neil Oliver. He made this claim on a channel that is called GB News, of which he is a presenter. I would say to you that if I had done that when I was a presenter on BBC News, or Emily had done that when she was a presenter on Newsnight, and expressed an opinion of that nature, the heavens would have opened. And yet Ofcom says, in line with freedom of expression, our rules allow broadcasters to cover controversial themes and topics. We recognise that these brief comments were the presenter's personal view and didn't materially mislead the audience. Well, an awful lot of people were misled. An awful lot of people do believe that because of what he said, that the rates of cancers were turbocharged as a result of the COVID vaccination. There is no evidence of that.
But you have to watch the whole show here, John. And this is the point. I mean, you may well be right that the BBC management heavens would have opened if either of you had done that when you were at the BBC. But, as far as Ofcom is concerned, if somebody's saying something like that and it needs to be challenged, that's what needs to happen. And provided that challenge is there. We are not about kind of censoring or saying things shouldn't be said.
But it wasn't.
It's
there,
about
was it?
making sure that the challenge is there. Well, that's what we
Was it
weighed up.
there?
That's what we looked into.
Because-
That's always
but
what
it
we
is
look
on a
into, is the
channel.
programme as a whole.
Yeah, but it is on a channel called GB News.
Well, that's just the name. There's nothing in the regulations that says that just because you're called, GB News or...
Well, it's purporting to be a news channel.
Well, what we judge is the actual programmes. And, I just think we need to get some of this, in perspective. This is a channel with a relatively small and loyal audience who are actually quite like that opinion-based programming. For some of the same reasons, I think, that people are increasingly turning to podcasts, actually. People want to hear something slightly more robust rather than a more sanitised version of news and current affairs. So I've got no problems with any of that. And the rules are that if you're talking about a matter of major public interest, major public policy, you need to make sure that there's a range of views, and in order to ensure due impartiality, and you need to make sure that anything inaccurate gets challenged.
Just on the wider picture then of that bit of broadcast space, when people express concerns, and I have to say I feel it slightly, that there is a foxification of British news, does it concern you?
Well, no, not when I actually go to the US and watch the news. And I know you've been in the US the last week, Emily, and you're going soon, John, and I'll be watching the, American channels, particularly this autumn, because there's going to be a lot of interesting news to watch around the US election. And my personal experience of that is that it's really, really, really one-sided. You don't get that range of views that you get on a British regulated service by Ofcom. I think it is quite different. It's one or the other. You turn on the TV in the US and one is Democrat, one is Republican, and it's very, very, very clear.
But what would you say to people who are worried that you might be scared of GB News, that you see them as this sort of, insurgent voice? Clearly you want to encourage them and encourage diversity of opinion and broadcast and all the rest of it, but that you just daren't go there with them because, they're a populist channel and you're scared of the populist channel.
I'm not quite sure why we would be scared, honestly. We're a regulator. We've got rules. We have processes, we run them, and we've done that in the past year. We've opened 19 investigations, and I think that track record is there.
And
I think there was a period of time last autumn where we'd opened up a lot of investigations, and we opened up a few more, actually, because there were a couple of problematic programmes during the autumn period, and we hadn't yet done the work and come out with them, and we have to run a fair process. And I think there was a time up until about March when you hadn't heard from us and we hadn't actually come up with the answers. We have since then. We've also published research on news and current affairs, and we're going to carry on doing this as we always have done. Whether it's Love Island or GB News, if people make complaints to us, we will investigate them. But we are always weighing freedom of expression into the debate. We have to do that by law, and rightly so. And I think sometimes people forget that and want us to intervene in a way that I would say starts to border on censorship, if I'm truly honest.
You'd like to be doing less of that? Is
No,
that right?
I don't agree with those who say that they think we should be intervening more. I think we are intervening, but it's very important when you're a regulator with strong powers to intervene in fundamental rights, in this case freedom of speech, that we are very clear about what we do and don't do. And I think some of the calls for us to act more are getting into quite draconian territory.
Okay, but just to go back to John's piece, if there is a debate with Neil Oliver and another side, let's say, about whether the COVID vaccine has been responsible for childhood cancer, whatever, are you happy to see that debate enacted on a regular British television station?
The proof of this is actually in the programme, but what we won't do at Ofcom is opine in advance.
No, but I don't. But what does that mean? The proof of the programme. Just as an example, is that okay as a broadcast? If I decide to say the COVID vaccine is creating cancer, if John hits back now and we're on GB News, is that fine? Well,
you'd expect that a really strong statement like that was getting challenged on a regulated programme. Of course, podcasts aren't regulated by Ofcom. That's another question you might want to come on to. But if you're on GB News or any other Ofcom service, then Ofcom regulated service, then it's the challenge that really matters. It's due accuracy. It's about allowing people to express their opinions. And I mean, look, I think it's a good thing that people are expressing those opinions and
Out
then
loud.
having the challenge, than just for it all to be happening on social media, on websites,
Okay.
out of plain
let's-
sight, in a
let's
way
come-
where you
yeah.
don't get that perspective brought.
Yeah. Can I ask you about this call to action by police chiefs today, who've outlined the scale of violence against women and girls? I think their statistic is 1 in 12 women will be a victim of. I'm interested, if it was online, would you call it online abuse, or would you call it violence against women?
I'd call it both. I mean,
Do you think it is violence against women?
yes, I do, and it is a fact that new technologies are weaponized against women all the time. And so we're now seeing, for example, deepfake technology, although as I just mentioned, it's a concern for sort of disinformation, but by far the most widespread use of deepfake tech is actually online porn. It's porn against public
We
figures, and
understand.
sometimes just against people that know each other in their day-to-day lives, and they're just weaponizing abuse through technology online in an incredibly harmful way.
Okay, so I think we understand better now. And I was listening to the mother of a murdered daughter this morning say that men who expose themselves publicly should be seen as red flags, as sexual predators. Do men who troll online carry that same stature? Are they red flags to sexual violence to you?
Gosh, look, I can't say, at any level of like real detail, like what are the patterns of behaviour online that we should particularly be flagging and be worried about. But, I do think that online technologies allow, in online spaces, allow people in impunity, if you like, to just behave in ways that they wouldn't if they were offline. And that can escalate in really, really nasty ways. And obviously offline harm, physical violence and abuse is absolutely horrific, but so is what women often experience online.
I guess I'm asking if you think there's a connection.
Yeah,
If
I
you
do think there's
we
a
should be
connection.
very aware of
Yeah.
how people write online and whether that translates into how they act.
Yeah,
offline.
there clearly can be a connection. And we know, again, from all our work at Ofcom, and to be honest, it's good to see the police coming out with this morning. We've been shining a spotlight on the extra risks to women and girls online for a while now. And we know that women are much more likely to experience harassment and, coercive control, particularly vulnerable women, but also female journalists, female politicians, more likely to be attacked. And we do need to see the online platforms start to take that more seriously. And in the autumn, we're going to be, again, opening this up as part of our implementation of the Online Safety Act. And we want to get people together to really sort of start to name some best practice that we think the industry can then all adopt.
Yeah.
So, maybe we can talk about that, in a couple of months' time.
Melanie Dawes, thank you very much indeed for being with us.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
It is a few days since we have spoken about this entity called, that's it, the Conservative Party. But on November the 2nd, a Saturday, they will announce their new leader. And you can be sure that Emily, Lewis and I are going to be in America when it happens, because it is 3 days before the presidential election. I kind of wondered whether they wanted to do it in a way that everyone will be so kind
Looking
of
elsewhere.
preoccupied.
Yeah. Don't look over here.
Don't look over here. We've got a new leader. Look
find
over there, where you've got the biggest fight ever for who's going to be the next president of the United States.
Funnily enough, though, and to our earlier chat, the chair of the 1922 committee, the sort of backbench of MPs who organises the whole sort of selection process, has called for a respectful debate with no personal attacks. And I think it's really interesting that they've gone straight out to say, actually, we don't want to sound like America. We don't want to sound like we're at each other's throats on this one. Can we please keep it nice within the party?
Well, what they're also saying is we don't want it to sound like the Conservative Party for the past 20 years.
Yeah, you're right.
Because they have been at each other's throats,
Yeah.
and it has cost them enormously.
fresh
and
start.
That is
Yeah.
the reason why they've got so few MPs in the House of Commons now, because the internal battles have been
Within
so
themselves.
vicious
Yeah.
for so long. So we get that in November. And just also to mark your card before we go, tomorrow there will be questions to the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, for the first time.
Yeah, PMQs is back, and Keir Starmer is facing a rebellion from his own side about why he has pledged to continue with the Conservatives cap on child benefits, no more child benefits after the second child. And one of his own MPs, Rosie Duffield, who he's already had, tension with in the past, has suggested that the policy itself is sexist and diminutive because it hits women and children most of all. Be interesting to see what his response to that is.
That is tomorrow. Thanks for being with us. We'll see you then. Bye-bye.
Bye for now.
The Newsagents. This is a Global Player original podcast.